The heart monitor would not shut up. It screamed in jagged bursts from Bay 3, a flat white wall pulsing green and red. Above it, the fluorescent lights hummed cold and steady. Outside the glass doors of the emergency room, Seattle rain streaked down in silver lines, blurring the parked cars and ambulance dock. Riley Quinn slid 2 fingers to the inside of the old man's wrist and glanced at the monitor. Oxygen in the low 80s. His chest rose shallow and fast beneath a paper gown that smelled faintly of antiseptic and stale cigarettes. Mr. Levi. I need you to breathe with me, Riley said, leaning close so he did not have to fight the noise. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Slow, I've got you. His eyes fluttered open cloudy but locked on her face. He followed her rhythm. Her own breath stayed even. In, out. She adjusted the nasal cannula, thumbed a dial, watched the numbers nudge up by 1 then 2. Behind her, a printer spit pages across a counter. The intercom crackled. A cart rolled past wheels squeaking in a manic staccato. ER never really went quiet. It only changed flavor. Quinn. The voice snapped from the doorway, clipped and already impatient. Riley looked over her shoulder. Dr. Victor Lang stood there, white coat, pristine tablet, held like a shield against his chest. His dark hair was combed straight back, not a strand out of place despite the dampness clinging to everyone else after the morning rush. You are 3 charts behind, he said. Auditors are here Monday. We need clean notes. Riley gave Mr. Levi one last steadying look. You're doing great, she murmured, then straightened. I'll document as soon as he's stable. Lang's eyes flicked to the monitor, then back to her. He is stable enough for you to walk 10 feet and type. He was 93 a minute ago, she said. I want him over 95 before I move. He is not your only patient. I know. Something settled between them, an old argument they had rehearsed too many times. Lang shifted his grip on the tablet, jaw tight. You are not in Afghanistan anymore, Quinn, he said, voice low enough that only she could hear. This is St. Catherine General Hospital. We do not improvise our way into a lawsuit. Chart the encounter. Riley's gaze drifted past him for half a second toward the glass doors and the gray curtain of rain outside. She felt the air in here heavy with disinfectant and recycled breath press against her ribs. She nodded once. In a minute, doctor. He stared at her another heartbeat, then turned and walked away. The tablet flashed in his hand as he tapped something hard enough to make the plastic click. Riley swallowed. The plastic pulse oximeter on Mr. Levi's finger blinked a new number. 94. 95. She could feel her shoulders loosen a fraction. From the hallway, a small voice floated in, high and breathy. Vroom, vroom, chopper coming in. Noah Miller shot past the nurse's station in a blur of striped sweatshirt and sneakers, a bright green toy helicopter held overhead. He flew it in loops, lips buzzing with rotor sounds while his mother hustled to keep up hospital wristbands still snug around his tiny arm. A month ago, he had not been running anywhere. Riley watched him make a tight turn around a linen cart, cheeks flushed, lungs filling and emptying without effort. Something inside her eased every time she saw that, like a knot briefly untying. Slow down, buddy, his mother called, laughing. You're not actually taking off. I am, Noah said. He swooped the helicopter toward Riley. Look, Nurse Riley, it's landing. She caught the toy gently before it hit her chest. Perfect landing, she said. The plastic was warm from his grip. How's the breathing? He inhaled dramatically, puffing out his chest, then exhaled with the exaggerated wheeze of a kid who had been told to show off. It doesn't hurt, he announced. Good, Riley said, and handed the helicopter back. Keep it that way. His mother mouthed a soft thank you over his head eyes shining. Riley gave a small nod and turned back toward the main desk. The clatter of keys on a laptop came from the corner. Dr. Amy Cho hunched on a swivel stool, curls escaping from a loose ponytail, dark circles under her eyes. She glanced up as Riley approached, then flicked her gaze toward the hallway where Lang had disappeared. You know he's going to keep pushing, Amy said quietly. He's got that vein in his forehead today. Riley propped a hip against the desk and pulled a chart toward herself. I noticed. 3 months from now, when he is bragging to the board about 0 malpractice claims, he will forget who actually kept his patients alive, Amy said half under her breath. Riley smiled, but it did not quite reach her eyes. My name on their list is not the point. You keep doing this, they will make you the point, Amy said. You saved Noah when everyone else was ready to call it post-op jitters. And what did you get for it? The question pulled the room sideways for a moment. Riley's hand rested on the mouse, but her mind stepped backward to a different night, a different set of numbers. Noah had been gray, then not pink. His tiny chest heaved, the soft skin above his collarbones pulling in with every breath. The monitor had chimed in a relentless, accusing rhythm. Lang had stood in the doorway, arms crossed. Post-op anxiety, he had said. He is panicking. Calm him down, give him a minute. He is scheduled for discharge in the morning. Riley had pressed the stethoscope to Noah's side, listened, moved, listened again. The right lung sounded thin, ghostly. The left sounded like someone had turned down the volume. His lips were edging blue. She had looked at Lang. His sats are dropping. He is not just scared. It is normal to look bad after a night in surgery, Lang had answered. He will settle. We are done for the day. He had checked his watch, not the boy. Riley remembered the way the air had seemed to thin out in that room, like someone had opened a small invisible valve. Her own chest had tightened. She had seen this pattern before in tense and dusty back rooms where no one spoke English and no one cared about forms. She had stepped to the red emergency kit mounted on the wall and flipped it open. Her fingers had found the sealed package by feel. A large bore needle gleamed under the harsh light. Quinn Lang had said sharply, "Do not touch that without an order." Noah had gasped, the sound wet and weak. Riley had met Lang's eyes for one long second. Then she had turned back to the boy, palpated the ribs, found her landmark, and pushed the needle through. There had been a tiny pop, a hiss, a rush of air escaping from a place it should not have been. Noah's chest had lifted easier almost at once. The monitor numbers had started to climb. Later in the conference room with the long table and the two bright overhead lights, Administrator Paul Grayson had slid a paper across to her. "Outcome excellent," he had said. "Method problematic." Lang had folded his hands. "You acted without a verbal order. You accessed equipment beyond your scope." "Yes," the boy improved. "That is not the point." Riley had looked down at the formal reprimand lines of neat black text, explaining how saving a life could be recorded as a kind of mistake. She had signed it because arguing would not change what they saw when they looked at her. The only thing that mattered to her was that Noah had gone home. Now standing at the nurse's station with Amy watching her, that memory flickered across her face like a shadow. "They already made their point," Riley said, voice quiet. "He is breathing. That's enough for me." Amy exhaled, then shook her head in a small, frustrated circle. "One day," she said, "they will decide that enough for you is too much for them." Riley turned back toward the hall, toward the bays filled with beeping machines and the slow rise and fall of chests that were not hers to keep. Rain thrummed against the glass doors, steady as a second heartbeat. She picked up a chart and walked toward the next room, listening for the sound of someone struggling for air. The first siren rose over the normal noise of the emergency room like a sharp new note. Then another joined it. Then another. The sound slid in under the hum of fluorescent lights, and the hiss of oxygen climbed over the beeping monitors and the low murmur of voices. Riley was finishing a set of vitals in Bay 5 when the charge nurse lifted her head, eyes narrowed. "That is 3 trucks in a row," she said. "Anybody know what is going on out there?" A television in the corner of the waiting room flickered to breaking news. Someone turned up the volume. A shaky live shot showed orange fire licking at a gray sky, black smoke clawing upward. The caption read, "Chemical plant explosion in South Seattle, multiple injuries expected." In the next breath, the double doors flew open and the smell arrived. Burned plastic, scorched cloth, that sweet, heavy tang of cooked flesh that never quite left your nostrils once you learned it. The paramedics pushed the first stretcher in, shouting over each other. Male, late 30s, full-thickness burns on 40%, airway singed, barely holding a sats. Crush injury, left leg pelvis, unstable, pressure dropping. Smoke inhalation, chest trauma, open laceration, coughing blood. The neat rows of empty gurneys filled in seconds. Dr. Lang appeared beside the nurse's station, white coat flaring like a flag. He slammed a clipboard down on the counter. "Triage tags," he called. "We follow protocol, red, yellow, green, black. No freestyling. I want a list of names and insurance providers as soon as they are conscious enough to answer." Riley was already moving toward the stretcher with the burned man. His skin looked like melted wax in places, blisters high and angry in others. His eyelashes were singed to little black stubs. He coughed and smoke-tinged spit dribbled down his chin. "Sir, can you hear me?" she asked, leaning close. His eyes flicked toward her. One pupil was sluggish. She slid a gloved finger under his jaw, felt the pulse counted without looking at a watch. Too fast, too thin. She tilted his head, listened to his breath, heard the rough scrape of damaged airways. Quinn Lang snapped, "Do not anchor yourself. Identify and move. We do not have time for you to play hero for one patient." She did not answer him. She lifted the man's chin, opened his mouth, checked for soot and swelling, called for high-flow oxygen and cool saline. A respiratory therapist hurried over, eyes wide. Behind her, another stretcher banged into the next bay. A man in a torn work shirt lay rigid leg twisted at an ugly angle beneath a temporary splint. His face was the color of old paper. "Pressures in the 80s and falling," a medic called. "We did what we could in the truck." Riley turned. "Amy," she called. "Take the burn watch's airway. Call me if he loses his voice or gets hoarse. I have the crush." Amy's eyes widened, but she nodded, pushing past Lang, who opened his mouth as if to object, and then shut it again, teeth clicking. Riley swung to the man with the crushed leg. She pressed on his pelvis with careful hands. He groaned deep and helpless. "Pain here?" she asked. He tried to nod sweat slick on his brow. "She is skipping the tags," Lang muttered to no one in particular. "We will not have a record of who arrived when." Riley barely heard him. She barked for more fluids, a second access line, blood type check. Her mind sorted the injuries by instinct and memory, cataloging which bodies were closest to the edge of a cliff no one could see. The man with the chest wound came next, mouth open in wide panicked gasps, every inhalation seeming to catch on something sharp inside. Riley saw the way his shoulder rose higher on one side, the way his lips pulled tight between each breath. "I cannot get air in," he choked. "You will," she said. "Look at me." His eyes locked on hers. She measured his breaths, counted between them. There was a hint of familiar pressure in the way his chest looked. Her fingers found gauze and tape without searching. "Quinn, we need you at triage," Lang called again. "You are throwing off the flow." "I am building one," she answered, not looking back. The next 10-15 minutes blurred into a chain of moments. Burns wiped gently fluids, hung tourniquets, adjusted wounds, wrapped. The air in the emergency department grew thick and hot, filled with the sharp scent of chemicals clinging to burned clothing. The sound of coughing was everywhere, harsh and wet. Several times a clerk called out for names and dates of birth. Often no one could answer. Riley watched the lips of each patient as they tried to form words, noted who could speak full sentences and who could barely push out a syllable. By the time the last ambulance of that first wave emptied, sweat clung to the back of her neck under her scrub top. Her wrists ached from constant pressure and movement. Her throat felt dry from calling orders over the noise. She stepped back finally, chest rising and falling faster than usual, and did a quick count in her head. 3 red-level patients stabilizing, 2 en route to surgery, several yellow and green waiting in chairs coughing into masks. Dr. Lang stood at the end of the hall shirt, damp under his coat hair, out of place for the first time. He held a stack of half-filled forms in one hand and a pen in the other. His eyes found her. "Office," he said. "Now." Riley looked at the nearest monitors, at the numbers that no longer screamed emergency. She pulled her gloves off, tossed them in the biohazard bin, and followed him. The conference room looked exactly as it had the day she signed her reprimand. Same long-polished table, same art print of some calm blue ocean, same smell of coffee that had cooled too long on a burner. Administrator Grayson sat at the far end, tie loosened just enough to suggest fatigue, not collapse. A single sheet of paper awaited Riley in the center of the table, a pen aligned neatly beside it. She took the chair closest to the door. Lang sat across from her, Grayson in the head seat. "Let us get to it," Grayson said, fingers steepled. The fire was unfortunate, the response impressive in some ways. The documentation, however, is a nightmare. Riley stared at the blank side of the paper. "The red-level patients are alive," she said. "One is on his way to the burn unit, one to orthopedic surgery, one is on BiPAP but stable. What exactly is the problem?" "The problem," Lang said, leaning forward, "is that you bypassed the triage station. You assigned yourself the highest acuity cases without consulting the attending. You gave verbal orders outside your official role. You did not complete intake forms before initiating treatment." "They were losing their airway and their blood," Riley replied, meeting his gaze. "Forms can wait. Air cannot." Lang's lips thinned. "You are a registered nurse," he said. "Not an emergency physician. You are not cleared to prioritize based solely on your impressions. There is a chain of command." Grayson nodded slowly. "You have talent, Quinn," he said. "No one disputes that. But our institution functions within rules. When those rules are ignored, we become vulnerable. Insurance reviews, legal exposure, media inquiries. We cannot afford a rogue element on the floor." Riley felt a strange calm settle over her. The word rogue floated in the air between them, thin and absurd. "Are you saying I should have let them crash in the hallway while I filled out their insurance numbers?" she asked. "We are saying," Grayson replied, "that your pattern of behavior shows a disregard for procedure. First the child last month, now this. We cannot wait for the day the outcome is not in your favor." Lang slid the paper slowly toward her. The movement sounded loud, a soft slide of fiber against polished wood. On the top line, in neat black letters, it read, "Termination of employment." Her name was printed below. "We are terminating your position at St. Catherine General effective immediately," Grayson said. "You will receive severance pay as outlined in your contract. Security will escort you to collect your belongings." Riley let the words settle. They did not sting the way she expected. Maybe because some part of her had been waiting for this since the day she opened the emergency kit for Noah. She picked up the paper. It trembled only slightly in her hand. "Do I get to say anything?" she asked. Lang made a small sound, something between a scoff and a breath. "You have said enough," he replied. "You are not a doctor. You do not get to rewrite how this department runs." Riley looked at him for a long moment. The fluorescent light picked out a sheen of sweat on his temple. Beyond the closed door, she could hear the muffled clatter and hum of the emergency room returning to a lower roar. She thought of burned skin under her gloved hands, of the crush of ribs, of the way each patient's eyes had searched hers wild and desperate, until the moment air found its way back into their lungs. She lowered her gaze and signed where they had marked. The pen scratched once across the paper. It sounded louder than the sirens had. When she stepped out of the conference room, the hallway seemed brighter. Nurses moved between bays, pushing carts, adjusting monitors. No one looked at her long enough to ask why her hands were empty. Through the glass wall of the waiting area, she saw Noah and his mother again. They were on their way out this time. Noah held his toy helicopter by the tail, letting it drag a little on the floor. He spotted her and broke away from his mother's hand, running toward the glass. "Nurse Riley," he yelled, his voice muffled by the barrier. He pressed his palm flat to the glass and waved hard with the other hand. His chest rose and fell smoothly. Riley lifted her own hand, splayed her fingers against the cool surface. For a second, his small hand lined up with hers through the thickness of the glass. His mother caught up, gently pulled him back, mouthed, "Another thank you." Then they were gone, swallowed by the gray light outside. Riley went to her locker. The room smelled of metal and fabric softener. She unpinned her badge from her scrub top and laid it on the shelf. Next to it, she set a folded sweatshirt, a mug, a small stack of handwritten thank you notes from patients who had taken the time. She left the notes. She took the mug and the sweatshirt and an old canvas bag that had been along for more miles than anyone here knew. By the time she pushed open the rear exit, the rain had thickened into sheets. It struck her face like cold fingers. She did not put up her hood. She walked out into it, the hospital doors closing with a soft, hydraulic sigh behind her. The sounds of the emergency room faded, replaced by the steady drum of water on asphalt and the distant hiss of traffic. Her hand slid into the canvas bag, fingers curling around the worn edge of something hard and familiar buried in the side pocket. The metal was cool through the fabric. She held it there, not yet ready to pull it out into the gray light. The rain did not let up. It came down harder as Riley reached the edge of the hospital lot, the kind of Pacific rain that soaked through layers heavy and patient. The asphalt shone under the streetlights, every puddle a bright oval reflecting the red of the ambulance bay and the white of the emergency sign. She kept walking until the hospital slipped out of her peripheral vision. Only then did she slow. The canvas bag knocked gently against her hip with each step. Her fingers were still curled around the hard shape in the side pocket. At the corner, she ducked under the narrow awning of a bus shelter. The plexiglass walls were beaded with water. A faded route map peeled at the edges. A single bench held an abandoned coffee cup and a flyer for a community blood drive. The world smelled of wet concrete and exhaust. She pulled her hand free from the bag and brought the object out into the gray light. It was an old military identification card, edges frayed laminate, bubbled and scratched. Her own face stared back from a younger year, jaw, tighter eyes flatter. Beneath it a service number and the words, United States Army. Next to it on the same chain swung a pair of thin, steel dog tags clinking softly. Her thumb traced the stamped letters. Corporal Riley Quinn, Combat. Medic Ghost Team Echo. The sound of the rotors came back before the image. Heat dust, that deep chopping sound that shook the inside of her chest more than her ears. A bright sky that hurt to look at. The smell of dried sweat and burned metal, not antiseptic, and coffee. In her mind, the concrete bus shelter dissolved. She was in a canvas tent long enough to echo pressed into the middle of a no-name valley halfway around the world. The air was thick with the metallic smell of blood and the copper tang of spent rounds. A battery-powered fan pushed hot air in a circle, doing nothing to cut the heat. Mason Reddick lay on a cot that had become an operating table. His body armor had been cut away, his shirt dripping red onto sand-stained tarp. Shrapnel had opened his side jagged and deep. Each breath rattled uneven, catching on something inside. Riley's hands had been slick, then gloves hazy with dust and fluid. Her forearms burned from holding pressure for too long. A headlamp banded across her forehead provided the only focused light. The generator that powered the main bulbs had died an hour into the surgery. No one had fixed it. Outside, someone had shouted into a radio voice tight with controlled panic. Echo 1, requesting immediate extraction. We have multiple critical casualties. Repeat, multiple critical. Coordinates transmitting. Static had answered a wash of useless sound. Riley had bent over Mason's chest eyes, inches from the field she had carved. She had clamped stitched, irrigated fingers moving through textbook sequences modified on the fly for the supplies she did not have. His blood had soaked through her knees. At some point, someone had pressed a mask to his face and squeezed a bag rhythmically to keep air moving. She had worked without feeling the sweat drip into the corners of her eyes. Birds are delayed, a sergeant had said at her shoulder, words tight. Command says weather communication, a lot of words. They are working on it. Working on it does not stop him from bleeding out, Riley had answered, not looking up. Hours blurred. Someone changed the bag on the mask. Someone else took over compressing. Voices faded. All she heard was the wet sound of tissue and the steady, stubborn beat under her fingertips where Mason's heart tried to hold a rhythm. At some point, 3 black body bags appeared along the far wall. They had been men whose names she knew, whose jokes she had heard around broken plastic tables. Now they were shapes zipped all the way up, lined in a row like equipment waiting to be inventoried. She remembered looking up once, just once, when the final zipper closed. The sound of it had cut through everything. If the birds were on time, someone had muttered they might have made it. Riley had wanted to ask which birds they meant, the ones on the flight line or the ones at a desk with a request form in their hand. She had not asked. She had pushed another piece of gauze into Mason's wound and kept sewing. When they finally did load him onto a helicopter, the horizon was already washed in purple. Mason had been pale eyes half shut, but his hand had fumbled for hers as the rotor spun overhead. She had leaned close so he could hear her over the rising roar. "You are not dying tonight," she had said. His mouth had twitched the ghost of a grin. "If I ever stand up my own team," he had whispered, voice threaded with pain and stubbornness, "you are my first call. You think faster than bullets, Quinn. Do not forget that." He had passed out before she could answer. Now under the bus shelter in Seattle, her reflection ghosted in the wet plexiglass overlaid his face for a heartbeat. Her hair was pulled back tighter. There were more lines around her eyes. She had come here to escape the weight of radios and flight schedules of choices delayed by people who did not have blood on their boots. She had traded sand for tile dust, for disinfectant orders shouted over gunfire, for orders filtered through committees. Somehow the choice in front of her always looked the same. Across the street, the hospital's main tower glowed against the low clouds. The emergency sign burned red. Somewhere in there, a shift report was being written without her name on it. The air changed. It started as a tremor under her shoes, a faint vibration running through the soles and up into her calves. The rain slanted suddenly, the drops driven sideways by a new wind. Then she heard it. The deep chopping thrum of rotor blades not on a screen, not in her head, but coming from over the roofline of the hospital itself. The sound swelled fast, pressing against the bus shelter walls, rattling the metal frame. On the far side of the parking lot above the ambulance bay, a dark shape dropped through the clouds. Navigation lights blinked red and green against gray. The Black Hawk looked impossibly out of place against the neat rows of compact cars and the glowing sign that read St. Catherine General. It descended slow and determined, blowing water and loose trash in spirals. Pedestrians scattered coats, whipping in the gusts. A trash can lid spun across the asphalt, clanging. Riley stepped out from under the awning rain, slapping her face. She squinted through the spray as the helicopter settled onto the staff lot, its wheels compressing with the weight. The side door slid open. A man in fatigue pants and a dark jacket jumped down, crouched for a second under the rotors, then straightened. His cap was pulled low, a radio headset hugging his jaw. He strode toward the closest security guard, who was frozen halfway between the entrance and astonishment. "I am looking for Riley Quinn," he shouted over the roar. "Former combat medic, Army, where is she?" The guard blinked water off his lashes. She just left. She was fired. Went out back." The man did not flinch. "Keep the rotors hot," he called back to the crew with a sharp hand signal. Then he turned, scanning the edge of the lot, the sidewalk, the bus shelter. His gaze found her. For a second, they simply looked at each other across the churned air, rain blowing between them, sound vibrating in their bones. He walked toward her boots, splashing through shallow puddles. Up close, she could see the insignia on his chest, the small name tape, Ramirez. There was a faint red mark pressed into his skin, where the headset had been sitting for too long. "Corporal Quinn," he said, as if confirming something he had been told, not asking a question. Riley's grip tightened on her dog tags. "Not anymore," she said. The words came out flatter than she intended. Apparently. His jaw worked once. "Major Cole?" "Ramirez. Joint Special Operations," he said. "We have a team pinned down in an unsecured zone. They have casualties, including one critical. They asked for a specific medic by name. You." The rain beat a quick pattern on the plexiglass behind her. Riley felt each drop as a small impact against her skin. "You found the wrong Riley," she said quietly. "I am a civilian nurse now. Or I was 10 minutes ago." Sergeant Major Mason Reddick Ramirez said, watching her face closely. He would not let anyone else touch him. "He said to tell you that. His exact words were that if you were breathing, you were his medic." Something shifted in her chest, a small unsteady beat. "He is alive?" she asked. "For now," Ramirez answered. "Femoral bleed, probable chest involvement from a new device we have not seen. The forward medic is out of his depth. They are trying to hold him together long enough to get you on scene." The sound of the rotors seemed to grow louder, though the helicopter had not moved. Riley could feel the vibration through the wet pavement, into her feet, into the bones of her legs. She looked past Ramirez toward the hospital building that had just spat her out. Behind the glass, she could see shapes moving. Someone had pressed their face to a window to watch the helicopter. She could not tell if it was a nurse, a clerk, a patient. The termination letter in her bag creased under her fingers. "You know I walked out of that world for a reason," she said. Her voice did not rise. It barely reached over the wind. "It broke people. It broke me." "I read your file," Ramirez replied. "It also shows a lot of people who are alive because of you. One of them is on a stretcher right now, refusing morphine until he hears that you are on the way." Riley shut her eyes for a moment. Behind her lids, she saw Mason on the cot dust on his lips and blood on her hands. He had looked at her that night with the same stubborn trust. She opened her eyes again. "Do I have a choice?" she asked. "Always," Ramirez said. For a heartbeat, the rain, the rotor washed the lights, all blurred. Then something inside her settled. Not peace exactly, but an answer. She reached into her bag, fingers finding the folded termination notice. She pulled it out, glanced at the printed words, then tossed it into the trash can beside the shelter. The paper slapped wetly against the plastic liner. The dog tag stayed in her hand. She nodded once. "All right," she said, "we do it my way." Ramirez did not smile, but a fraction of tension left his shoulders. "Your way is the reason we are here," he said. "Let us move." They ran together across the parking lot, rain splashing up around their ankles. The helicopter loomed larger with each stride, rotors churning, engine whine rising. A crew chief reached down, grabbed her arm, and pulled her into the open door. Inside, the noise became a thick wall. The air smelled of fuel and oil and damp canvas. Seats lined the sides, webbing straps hanging loose. Riley slung her bag down, dropped into a seat, and snapped a harness across her chest. Her hands moved like they remembered this rhythm more than any shift change or charting protocol. Outside, the city blurred through the open door as the Black Hawk lifted from the soaked asphalt and climbed into the rain. The city fell away under the helicopter, swallowed by rain and low cloud. Seattle became a smear of lights and shadows through the open side door. Then there was only dark gray water streaming past the frame and the steady muscle of the rotors beating overhead. Riley felt the lift in her stomach and the familiar pinch of the harness against her shoulders. The engines were so loud that spoken words turned into shapes more than sounds, riding the vibration of the hull. A crew chief moved sideways in the narrow space, handed her a green headset. She slipped it on the foam cup, sealing out some of the roar, replacing it with a different kind of noise. Radios checked voices, short phrases, and clipped tones. Ramirez sat across from her, strapped in one hand, braced on a metal bar. "Quinn, you reading me?" His voice came through the headset, clearer than his moving lips. "Loud," she answered. "Tell me what I am walking into." He nodded once and turned his head toward the cockpit. "Vector 6 patch her through to Saber 2's medic," he said. "She needs a picture before we drop in." There was a pause, then a crackle. A thin, stressed voice filled her ears. "This is Specialist Harlan at Saber 2, the medic said. The sound of gunfire popped faintly in the background, distant and irregular. "Who is this?" "Riley Quinn," she said. "Names and titles could come later. Give me Reddick's vitals and injuries now. Start with his leg." There was the rustle of fabric, someone shifting. "Femoral bleed from shrapnel high on the right thigh," Harlan replied. "We packed it and put on a tourniquet. Pressure was in the 90s, an hour ago dropped to 70s. He is pale, cold, sweating. Heart rate 130 and climbing." "Chest?" she asked. Another rustle, then Harlan again. "Breath sounds diminished on the left. He is working hard to breathe. We could not tell if it was the vest or something else. No exit wound we can see, just bruising and maybe a cracked rib. He keeps saying his chest feels tight." "Voice changes?" she asked. "Getting weaker," Harlan said. "He was barking orders 10 minutes ago. Now he can barely get a sentence out." Riley looked down at her hands. They were already moving, unbuckling the field kit at her feet, opening compartments. She pulled out a roll of tape, a small black marker, an airway set, a plastic-sealed pack with a large needle inside. "How many other casualties?" she asked. 3 more, Harlan answered. 1 suspected pelvic fracture, 1 blast concussion, 1 with partial hearing loss and minor shrapnel. All breathing. "Reddick is the only one with this chest thing. He is also the only one who keeps threatening to crawl off the litter and finish the fight." Ramirez snorted softly through his nose. "That sounds like him," he said. Riley laid the equipment out on the bench beside her. The metal glinted in the dim red cabin light. She checked each piece by touch more than sight. The smooth barrel of the needle, the plastic of the syringe, the thin scalpel pouch. Her fingers knew where to find everything. "Harlan," she said, "you keep pressure on that leg above the wound, but not on the tourniquet. Do not loosen it for any reason. Keep him as flat as you can. Elevate his legs a little if he tolerates it. Talk to him. Do not let him drift." Yes, ma'am, Harlan said. He sounded younger with each yes. And listen, she added. If his neck veins start to bulge, if his trachea looks like it is sliding off center, if his breath drops to barely a whisper on one side, you tell me the second we touch down. Do not wait for someone to sign anything. There was a small silence, then a tight copy that. The pilot's voice came next. 10 minutes out, he said. Hot landing. Keep your heads down. Riley clicked her mic off and leaned back against the vibrating wall. Her heart was beating a little faster than it had in the conference room, but there was a familiar shape to it. Not dread. Focus. Across from her, Ramirez watched her hands on the equipment. You have done this before, he said, almost conversational in the radio silence. She glanced up. I spent a year stitching people together in places that did not officially exist, she said. This is familiar, unfortunately. He nodded once, that was all. The helicopter dropped lower. The engines shifted pitch. Through the open door, the gray peeled back to reveal a rough patch of earth carved out of some anonymous ridgeline. Hesco barriers and sandbags formed ragged walls. Tents and low structures crouched against the wind. Lights glared on poles, painting everything in stark white and black. Tracer fire glowed faintly beyond the outer perimeter, tiny streaks of light that burned and vanished. The landing skids kissed dirt and bounced once. The crew chief slapped her shoulder, then shoved the door wider. Go, he shouted. Heat hit her first hot and dry and carrying the sharp smell of dust and burned fuel. Then the noise rushed back in without the headset's cushion. Shouted orders, the distant cough of automatic weapons, the whine of a generator straining above its comfort. She ducked instinctively as she jumped to the ground, the rotor wash grabbing at her clothes and hair. Ramirez dropped beside her. They ran low under the spinning blades toward a cluster of figures near a low concrete building. A makeshift triage area had formed on a stretch of packed earth. Cots folding tables, open cases of supplies. 4 soldiers lay on litters, each attended by at least one medic or corpsman. The one in the center had the command presence even flat on his back. Mason Reddick. His face was pale beneath streaks of grime. Sweat shone at his temples. His right thigh was swathed in blood-soaked bandages, a tourniquet cinched high and cruelly tight. Tubing snaked from his arm to a bag of fluid hanging from an improvised stand. His vest lay tossed aside, plate cracked and bent. His chest rose unevenly. One side worked harder than the other, pulling against some invisible weight. Each breath was shallow and fast. His lips moved around a curse that barely made sound. Riley crossed the distance in 3 strides. Mason, she called low enough that the word belonged to just them. His eyes snapped open. For a moment they did not focus. Then they found her. A slow, crooked smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Took you long enough, he rasped. I had traffic, she said. You look like hell. He tried to laugh and winced instead. The movement sent a new sheen of sweat across his brow. Specialist Harlan hovered at his side, hands pressed above the wound at his thigh. He looked both relieved and terrified at the same time. Pressure's barely there, he said to Riley. I have been holding this for 20 minutes. You did good, she said, already moving. Her hands went to Mason's chest, fingers sliding between ribs, pressing gently, listening with more than ears. She counted his breaths. She watched his neck. His jugular veins were beginning to stand out under the skin ridges that did not belong there. The space above his collarbones looked tight full. Talk to me, she said to him, full sentence. He pulled in air tried. Team is fine, he got out, just a scratch. That was not a sentence, it was an effort. Behind her boots crunched on gravel with a different kind of rhythm. Authoritative, practiced. Who is in charge of this mess? A voice barked. Who authorized landing a Black Hawk at my forward aid without clearing it through command? Riley did not turn. Her fingers found the sound on Mason's left side, listened. The air there was a faint whisper, far too quiet. On the right, the breath was loud and harsh. Lieutenant Colonel Bradley Kane Medical Command, someone muttered nearby as if introducing a storm cloud. He deployed in last week. Kane moved into her peripheral vision in a wash of white and rank. He wore a clean field coat with a caduceus on the chest, rank displayed clearly on his collar. His jaw was set, his eyes sharp in the glare. He took in Riley's bare forearms, the dog tags at her throat, the way everyone had stepped back half a pace around her without quite realizing it. Who are you? He demanded. You are not in my manifest. Riley Quinn, she said, still focused on Mason's chest. Combat medic attached to Saber 2 at the request of Sergeant Major Reddick. His chest is about to collapse. You are a civilian nurse, Kane snapped. You have no authority to perform advanced procedures out here. Step aside and let the officers handle this. Mason's hand twitched, searching for hers. She caught it without looking. Her hands stay, he whispered, voice barely scraping out. Everybody else shuts up. Kane bristled. Sergeant Major, you are in no position to dictate care, he said. We follow the theater treatment protocols here, not whoever drops in on a joyride. Riley finally looked up at him, The rotor wash tugged at a stray strand of hair near her temple, dust gritted between her teeth. His mediastinum is shifting, she said evenly. You see the neck veins. You see the deviation. You have one functioning lung trying to do the work of two. If you wait for a radiograph or a written order, you will watch him arrest in front of you. Kane opened his mouth, then closed it. He flicked a glance at Mason's neck, at the bulging veins, at the way his trachea seemed subtly off-center. I am the senior medical officer present, he said. If anyone is going to take that kind of risk, it is going to be me. You do not see it, Riley replied. There was no anger in her tone, only something flat and certain. I do. You are afraid of the paperwork that follows a needle in the wrong place. I'm afraid of his next breath being his last. Those are not the same fear. A thin ring of soldiers had gathered a few feet back, hovering between wanting to help and knowing they should not crowd. Their faces were streaked with dirt and sweat, eyes darting between Kane's insignia and Riley's hands. Harlan looked from one to the other, jaw clenched. What do you need me to do? He asked Riley quietly. Hold his hand, she said. Do not let go. He is going to feel this. She snapped the seal on the needle pack with her teeth, spat the bit of plastic aside. The long steel glimmered in the harsh light. She scrubbed quickly where she could skin that was already slick. Kane stepped forward, hand half extended as if to grab her wrist. Quinn, if you touch that chest without my sign-off, I will have you court-martialed, he said. Mason swallowed a small visible movement in his throat. Do it, he whispered. For a moment the world narrowed to a point the size of the needle tip. The noise faded. The heat, the dust Kane's rank, the distant gunfire. All of it moved to the edges. Riley found her landmark by touch. Second intercostal space mid-clavicular line. She could have drawn it in her sleep. Her fingers pressed, felt the give of skin, the resistance of cartilage, the promise of the air trap beneath. She drove the needle in. There was a fraction of a second with no sound at all. Then a rush. Air hissed out of Mason's chest like an open valve, hot and angry. The barrel of the needle vibrated in her grip. His eyes flew wide, then rolled as the tension shifted. The bulge at his neck softened almost visibly. The monitor at his side, jury-rigged with old leads, beeped in a slightly slower rhythm. His next inhale came easier. The rise of his chest evened the left side, joining the right in something like harmony. Harlan let out a breath he might have been holding for minutes. Holy, he started, then stopped himself. Kane stared for a long second, feature set in a complicated pattern of resentment and reluctant understanding. You got lucky, he said quietly. Riley taped the needle in place, securing it, eyes never leaving Mason's face. No, she answered. I got there. Mason's fingers squeezed hers, once weak but very much alive. A new sound cut through the triage space then. A deeper engine, heavier rotors. The Chinook announced itself not by sight first, but by the way the ground seemed to shake more fully underfoot. Heads turned. Conversations stalled. Dust lifted in a new pattern as the larger helicopter settled at the far edge of the compound. General on deck, someone called instinct more than protocol in their voice. Lieutenant General Naomi Pierce stepped down from the ramp, helmet under one arm, dark hair pulled back tight. Her uniform bore campaign patches and ribbons that caught the floodlights. She walked with a purpose that did not rush, but did not drift. Her eyes swept the scene. The litters. The clustered medics. The one chest with a needle standing out like a small flag. The woman in scrubs and boots arms, splattered dog tags flashing once under the lights. Kane straightened, shoulders back, chin up. General Pierce, he began. We had an unapproved insertion into the medical chain. I was just about to address the situation. Pierce did not look at him. She walked straight to Riley and Mason. Riley became aware of how she must look. No rank visible, only tired eyes and drying blood. The needle still in place. Her hand still wrapped around Mason's. Pierce stopped at the foot of the litter. For a heartbeat, they regarded each other. Something moved in the general's expression, a small flicker of recognition. Corporal Quinn, Pierce said. Her voice carried easily without needing to shout. You are a difficult person to track down. You found me anyway, Riley said. You have a habit of working where the radios do not reach, Pierce replied. She set her helmet down, straightened fully, and brought her hand up in a crisp salute. The gesture was clean, sharp, undeniable. Around them there was a small shock in the silence. Soldiers who had been mid-step halted. Harlan's mouth parted. Even Kane seemed to lose his words for a moment. Riley hesitated just long enough for her body to remember old habits, then returned the salute with blood-streaked fingers. Pierce dropped her hand and looked around, voice shifting so that it carried to the edge of the gathered group. This medic, she said, pulled Reddick out of Helmand with a penlight and a box of gauze when the flights backed up and the radios failed. Today she did it again under fire in a parking lot none of you will ever see on a map. She let those words sit in the dry, hot air. If your rank makes you hesitate when someone cannot breathe, she continued softer, but no less clear, you should hand that rank back. No one spoke. The only sound for a moment was the mixed chorus of helicopters idling and monitors beeping in steadier patterns. Riley felt every pair of eyes on her. It did not feel like the conference room where every look had carried suspicion. This felt heavier and somehow lighter all at once. Mason shifted his hand still in hers. "Listen to the lady," he muttered. "She outranks all of you." A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the triage area, rough and genuine, the kind of release that comes after someone realizes they are all still here. The night at the forward base did not end with the needle. Once Mason's breathing settled into a rough but steady rhythm movement picked up again. Orders snapped through the air. Medics checked lines and dressings. Someone rolled a portable monitor closer, securing the cables. A litter team arrived with a stretcher board and straps for transport to the bigger surgical facility downrange. Riley stayed at Mason's side while they prepared him to move. She checked the dressing at his thigh, confirmed there was no fresh bloom of red through the bandages, adjusted the angle of the fluid bag. "You hear that?" she asked him, leaning close. Hear what his voice was still sandpaper, but it carried better now. "The fact that you are breathing louder than the helicopter," she said. He let out a breath that tried to be a laugh and ended in a cough. Could have done this without all the drama he managed. "You do not know how," she said. As the litter team started to lift, he caught her wrist fingers cold but insistent. "Do not disappear this time," he muttered. "I'm not doing another tour wondering if you are buried in some clinic in the suburbs." She squeezed his hand once, then let it go as they carried him toward the waiting Chinook. General Pierce stopped Riley with a light touch on the elbow. "You are riding out on separate transport," Pierce said. "We need to debrief you properly before someone tries to fold you back into a staffing spreadsheet." Riley nodded. "As long as he makes it to an actual operating room, you can debrief all you want." "He will," Pierce said. "You stacked the odds in his favor." She looked at Riley for another beat, studying her. "Places like that, a hospital, forget that odds are not theoretical for people like you." Pierce added almost an afterthought. "We will be in touch when you are back in Seattle." Then she walked away to confer with Kane and the other officers, her voice dropping into a lower register that did not reach the triage area. Hours later, under a different sky and softer lights, a camera lens picked up the scene in flattened flashes. A local news crew had parked outside St. Catherine General's main entrance. The anchor in a bright raincoat stood with the hospital's illuminated sign behind her shoulder. Footage from a shaky cell phone played over her right shoulder on the broadcast, showing the Black Hawk earlier that evening dropping into the staff lot, rotor wash, whipping coats and paper. "Viewers sent us this video of a military helicopter landing at St. Catherine General," the anchor said, voice smooth. "Sources tell us the aircraft was part of an urgent extraction involving a former Army medic who was recently employed here as a nurse. That nurse, identified as Riley Quinn, was reportedly terminated minutes before the helicopter arrived. In the staff lounge, the television's glow painted tired faces in blue and white. Nurses clustered around the table. Orderlies leaned in the doorway. A half-eaten pizza sat abandoned on the counter, cheese congealing under the fluorescent light. Dr. Amy Cho stood near the back, hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee gone cold. On the screen, a freeze frame captured Riley caught mid-stride in the hospital lot, head bent against the rain, her canvas bag slung over one shoulder. A second later, another clip showed her being pulled into the helicopter rotors, shaking the frame. "They are saying she was Special Forces," a respiratory therapist murmured. "Ghost something, I thought she was just quiet." Another nurse shook her head slowly. "I heard she got written up last month for that kid in pediatrics, the one in 14, the one who almost coded. The one who is now running around with a toy helicopter," Amy said louder than she intended. The room turned toward her. "I saw her that night," Amy went on throat tight. "Dr. Lang wanted to go home. He said Noah was just anxious." Riley listened to his chest and knew his lung was collapsing. She did the decompression herself. If she had waited for an order, that kid would be on a ventilator if he was here at all. No one interrupted. "She did the same thing this morning," Amy said. "She grabbed the worst cases because she knew how. We were all standing there waiting for someone to give us permission to do our jobs. She did not wait." A tech shifted uneasily. "Careful, Amy. This place does not like that kind of talk." Amy felt her face heat, but she did not look away from the screen. "Maybe this place should watch the news," she said. "The Army just landed a helicopter on our parking lot for the person we threw out the back door." In his office, Administrator Grayson watched the same broadcast on a smaller television mounted in the corner. The sound was turned low. He did not need it. The caption bar did enough damage. "Former St. Catherine nurse extracted by military to save elite unit, sources say." His desk phone had been ringing off and on for the last 20 minutes. Lines blinked with pending calls, media inquiries, board members, legal counsel. He let it ring while he stared at the freeze frame of the helicopter hovering over his hospital logo. Dr. Lang stood near the window, hands stuffed deep in his coat pockets. He had not sat down since the first call came in. They do not know the full story, Lang said. The press rarely does. They know enough to make this ugly, Grayson replied. He muted the television and the office went very quiet. Through the glass he could see the main lobby. Patients came and went. Families clustered around the registration desk. Every so often someone paused to look out at the wet rectangles on the asphalt where the helicopter skids had pressed into the surface. She is a talented clinician, Grayson said slowly. She is also now the face of a narrative we do not control. Lang's jaw clenched. She broke protocol, he said, twice. That has not changed. No, Grayson agreed. But the fact that a 3-star general just saluted her in front of half a battalion changes how people perceive what protocol means. Lang did not answer. His gaze had gone distant, fixed on some point beyond the glass. Across town, in a small apartment lit by a single lamp, Noah's mother stared at the same news report. Hannah Miller stood with one hand braced on the kitchen counter, the other still wrapped around a dish towel. Noah sat cross-legged on the floor in front of the television toy helicopter, balanced on his knee, eyes wide. That is my hospital, he said. That is my nurse. The footage cut to a still of Riley in uniform from some older archive, her face, younger hair tucked under a helmet. Then back to her climbing into the helicopter behind the hospital that morning. Hannah swallowed. She saved you, she said to Noah, not looking away from the screen. And they fired her. Noah did not understand the mechanics of employment. He understood that the lady who had made his chest stop hurting was now on the television with soldiers and loud flying machines. We need to go say thank you again, he decided. Hannah grabbed her keys so fast the dish towel fell to the floor. At St. Catherine, the security cameras caught a compact sedan sliding into the visitor lot and stopping crooked across a space. Hannah climbed out, rain darkening her sweatshirt. Noah clambered free from the backseat helicopter, clutched tight, hood up. They did not stop at the front desk. Hannah walked straight to the administration wing, her steps quick and unsteady. A receptionist started to raise a hand in protest, but something in Hannah's face stopped her. Grayson looked up as the office door opened without a knock. Hannah stood there, breathing hard rain beating on her cheeks where it mixed with something else. We are in the middle of something, he began. Yes, she said, you are. Noah peered around, her hip eyes flicking from Grayson to Lang, who had turned away from the window. My son was in your hospital last month, Hannah said. He could not breathe. Your doctor said it was anxiety. The nurse knew better. She stuck a needle in his chest and saved his life, while he stood in the doorway telling her not to. Lang's shoulders pulled back. I followed standard post-operative review, he said. We handled that case internally. No, Hannah shot back. She handled that case. You handled paperwork. Her voice shook, but it did not crack. She reached down, resting a hand on Noah's head. You fired the only person in this building who looked at my kid like he was more than a line in a risk report, she said. You fired her, and 5 minutes later, the United States military landed in your parking lot to take her someplace she was needed. Silence followed her words. The hum of the overhead light seemed suddenly very loud. Noah stepped forward before anyone could respond. He lifted the toy helicopter high. She made me breathe, he said. You did not. There was no anger in his tone. It was simple fact. Grayson opened his mouth, closed it again. The termination letter on his desk looked smaller from where Hannah stood, but Riley's name was still visible on it, black on white. I am sorry you feel that way, he began. I am sorry you do not, Hannah replied. She turned before they could say anything else, took Noah's hand, and walked out. By the time the black sedan from Joint Special Operations delivered Riley back to the city, the rain had shifted to a fine mist. The skyline rose out of it, familiar shapes softened at the edges. She sat in the backseat, forehead resting lightly against the cool glass. Streetlights slid past in soft streaks. Her body ached in places she had forgotten could ache. Her ears still hummed with the echo of rotors and the ring of Pierce's voice. Quinn, the driver said, watching her in the rearview mirror. We have orders to drop you at your apartment. There is also a note here suggesting you may want to stop by your previous place of employment. Something about unfinished business. He sounded skeptical of the phrase. Riley considered. The idea of walking back into St. Catherine felt strange. Not frightening, just out of joint. Back gate, she said finally, service entrance. He nodded and turned the wheel. The hospital rose out of the mist, as it had earlier that day, the same red sign, the same glass. The only new marks were 2 darker ovals in the staff lot, where the helicopter's weight had pressed the ground faint circles that would fade with time and traffic. The sedan rolled to a stop near the rear employee entrance. Riley saw them before the car had settled. A small cluster of people stood under the overhang, 2 nurses still in scrubs, an orderly, the clerk from the night shift. Dr. Amy Cho arms wrapped around herself against the damp. They had the look of people who were not sure if they were waiting or just happened to be standing there. Riley stepped out of the car, canvas bag over her shoulder. The mist touched her face like ghost fingers. For a moment, no one moved. Then the employee door opened from the inside and Hannah stepped out, hair-damp coat unzipped. Noah squeezed past her legs and broke into a run. "Riley," he shouted, voice cutting through the soft rain. He crashed into her middle arms, wrapping around her waist, helicopter thumping against her ribs. She caught herself, and then him, hands folding around his back. "You came back," he said, burrowing his face into her scrubs. "Guess I did," she answered. Hannah reached them, stopping a few feet away. "Thank you," she said, the words very small and very full. "For the first time, and for whatever you just did out there." Riley shook her head. "You already thanked me," she said, "twice now." Noah leaned back enough to stare up at her. "You looked like the people on TV," he announced, "with the big helicopter and everything." Riley smiled a tired curve of her mouth. "Your helicopter is cooler," she said. "Mine makes too much noise." Behind them the staff watched. Amy's eyes glistened. One of the nurses looked down at her shoes. Riley met their gazes in turn. There was no accusation in her face, only a quiet acknowledgement. They had stayed. She had left. The building behind them held all of that silent and tall. "Take care of each other," she said simply. No one answered, but several heads dipped small nods that felt like promises. Riley released Noah, gently ruffled his hair once, then turned toward the sedan waiting at the curb. The mist swirled around her shoulders. The dog tags at her throat were warm against her skin. The hospital, the parking lot. The faint marks of the helicopter's skids all slid behind her as the car pulled away into the soft gray. Riley's apartment was small enough that the front door opened straight into the living room. A couch, a secondhand coffee table, a narrow kitchen. The kind of place you could cross in 10 steps. She dropped her canvas bag on the chair by the door and stood for a moment listening. The quiet felt thick after so many hours of engine noise and raised voices. The only sound was the refrigerator humming and the faint tap of rain on the balcony railing. On the table someone had placed a stack of mail. The neighbor kids sometimes did that when the box overflowed. Most of it was glossy junk. Flyers, supermarket coupons, a menu for a new Thai place 2 blocks over. 2 envelopes sat on top that did not belong with the rest. One was a stiff, heavy rectangle, cream-colored with her name printed in precise block letters. Riley Quinn. The return address carried a seal she recognized even without reading it closely. The other was standard white, the hospital's logo in blue in the upper left corner. She reached for the cream envelope first. The paper inside had weight. When she opened it, it gave off the faint smell of ink and something formal that reminded her of promotion boards and briefings. A spread of text sat on the page, centered and measured, with a wet signature at the bottom that dug a little too deep into the paper. The Secretary of Defense requested her return to active duty. Not as a corporal this time. The words spelled out a promotion to Captain Riley Quinn and described a role that did not exist before tonight. Director of Combat Field Medical Training for Special Operations. The phrasing was careful. It spoke of experience of proven performance under pressure, of the need to codify knowledge learned the hard way, so that others did not have to repeat the same mistakes. It was the kind of language that turned knights like Helmand and this last mission into bullet points. Her eyes moved to the bottom of the page where the ink thickened. The signature there was real, not printed. Her fingers brushed the raised edge of the official seal. It pressed back metal hidden under paper. She set the letter down and picked up the hospital envelope. The language inside was softer and stranger. St. Catherine General extended its apologies for any distress caused by the recent termination of her employment. The review committee had reconsidered the circumstances. They acknowledged her skill and courage. They invited her to return in a new capacity as Director of Nursing Quality and Standards. There were no signatures dug deep into the fibers, just neat names above typed titles. Grayson, Lang, 2 others she barely knew. No one had put a handwritten note in the margin. She read it twice. The words clustered politely around things they did not name. On the table side by side, the 2 documents did not look so different. 2 pages. 2 offers. Same number of lines on the letterhead. Riley reached for a clean sheet of her own and a pen that still had some ink left in it. The tip scratched softly as she wrote. The sentence was short. Always put the patient before the ego. The real risk is the breath you hesitate to save. She folded the note once, slipped it into the return envelope from the hospital letter, and sealed it. The motion felt simple. For a long moment she stood there with her hand on the envelope. Then she let it go and turned back to the heavier paper waiting on the table. She did not need to write anything on that one. Her answer had been building since the moment she climbed into the helicopter outside St. Catherine. The wind at Fort Rainier smelled different from the city. There was pine in it and cold earth and the faint bite of fuel from the motor pool. The rain here came in gusts, sweeping across the parade ground in thin sheets that did not quite soak through if you kept moving. Riley stepped out of the transport vehicle and into a wide rectangle of open space lined with people. Rows of uniforms stretched away in both directions. Fresh faces, older faces, some curious, some closed. rows of boots set heel to toe on wet gravel. At the front, a low platform held a microphone stand and a simple podium. General Pierce waited there, hands behind her back, cap tucked under one arm. She turned as Riley approached, gave a small nod. Busy day, Pierce said. If you see, Pierce said. Riley allowed a breath that might have been a laugh. You have a talent for understatement, she said. Pierce faced the formation, and the slight murmur of noise died away on its own. Recruits, she said, voice cutting cleanly across the field. Officers, medics. Today you are looking at someone who has spent years doing the work that you trained to do, not in simulation bays or in lectures, but in tents and alleys and hallways and parking lots. A few heads tilted, eyes lifting to Riley. This morning, Pierce went on some very educated people told Captain Quinn that her insistence on acting when she saw danger made her a liability. Tonight, those same instincts kept one of your senior sergeants alive long enough to be on an operating table with a fighting chance. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. If any of you think your rank exists to keep you safe from making hard choices, look at her. She chose to walk back into the work you say you want. Learn from that. She stepped aside. Riley moved to the podium. The microphone picked up the small sound of her adjusting it. Rain whispered against her shoulders, dampening the edges of her hair. Hundreds of faces watched. Some she might know one day, most she would not. She scanned them once, then spoke. My name is Riley Quinn, she said. Most of you do not know me. You will know the people I train. A small ripple of attention tightened in the crowd. I have worked in places where there was no time to ask who was in charge, she said. Only time to ask who could not breathe, who was bleeding, who was sliding away. In those moments, your hands will move before your brain catches up. That is what we are going to practice here. Not just the textbook, but the part where every second feels louder than an alarm. She lifted her own hands, palms up, then let them drop back to the podium. You will carry metal into those moments, she said. Needles, clamp, scissors, plates and tourniquets. You will also carry paper, orders, protocols, checklists. Both matter. Both exist for reasons, but they are not equal when someone is turning blue in front of you. She let the words sit, sinking into the row on row of shoulders. Your job is to know your tools so well that when you hear a breath falter, you do not freeze, she said. You move, you see, you decide. You understand the rules. You also understand when the person in front of you cannot wait for you to look them up. No one shifted. Even the rain seemed to hold in the air for a heartbeat. You will make mistakes, she said. You will wake up thinking about the ones you did not bring back. That is part of this. What you can control is what you do with the next set of hands you put your gloves on for. She stepped back from the microphone. The formation stayed silent for a second longer, then the sound came a steady clap that grew and leveled out, not wild, not hesitant, solid. General Pierce returned to her side as the clapping faded. You will have everything you need here, Pierce said quietly. Facility staff support. The program is yours to shape. Riley looked out at the field one more time. The fog from the mountains had begun to roll in, softening the tree line. A helicopter lifted off somewhere beyond the barracks, blades turning slow at first, then faster, rising into the low clouds. She watched it for a moment, tracking the shape as it disappeared into the gray. The sound wrapped around the parade ground and then stretched outward, thinning. Her fingers moved unconsciously to the tags at her throat. The metal there was warm now, not cold. Under her palm she could feel the small, steady drum of her own pulse. She breathed in the cold, resin-touched air, held it, and let it go. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.